In 1847, the small Hessian village of Steinau an der Straße appeared to hold nothing more sinister than the usual rural hardships of 19th-century Germany. Located roughly 60 kilometers northeast of Frankfurt am Main, the settlement of barely 800 souls nestled between rolling hills and dense forests that had witnessed centuries of folklore and whispered tales. The cobblestone streets wound past half-timbered houses with steep-pitched roofs, their shuttered windows seeming to guard secrets as old as the stones themselves. The brothers Grimm had departed their childhood home decades earlier, leaving behind memories of a simpler time when Jacob Ludwig Karl Grimm and Wilhelm Karl Grimm collected stories from local peasants and townsfolk. What few knew was that their methodical documentation had uncovered fragments of something far darker than mere children's tales. Hidden within the archives of the University of Göttingen lay a collection of manuscripts that would remain sealed until a young linguistic student named Friedrich Wilhelm Becker stumbled upon them in 1863. Becker, 24 years old and pursuing his doctoral studies under the guidance of Professor Georg Heinrich Pertz, had been granted access to the Grimm collection for his thesis on dialectical variations in Lower Saxon folk narratives. Born in the nearby town of Fulda, he possessed an intimate understanding of the regional dialects and customs that had shaped the brothers' early work. His supervisor described him as methodical to the point of obsession, spending 14 to 16 hours daily in the archives, transcribing and cross-referencing documents with an intensity that concerned his fellow students. The discovery occurred on a bitter February morning when Becker noticed inconsistencies in the cataloguing system. Several manuscripts bore notations in Jacob Grimm's distinctive handwriting, but carried no corresponding entries in the official index. These documents, wrapped in oiled leather and bound with red twine, contained stories that bore little resemblance to the sanitized tales published in the Kinder- und Hausmärchen. Instead, they detailed accounts of ritualistic practices, unexplained disappearances, and testimonies from villagers who spoke of children who vanished during the dark months of winter. According to Becker's notes, discovered years later among his personal effects, the manuscripts referenced a network of storytellers who claimed their tales originated not from imagination, but from witnessed events. These narrators, primarily elderly women from isolated farming communities throughout Hesse and Lower Saxony, had provided the brothers with accounts that defied rational explanation. The documents suggested that Jacob and Wilhelm had initially dismissed these stories as products of superstition and ignorance, but gradually began to recognize patterns that troubled them deeply. The most disturbing collection within this hidden archive concerned a series of incidents that occurred between 1808 and 1812 in villages surrounding Steinau. Multiple witnesses described children who exhibited strange behavioral changes following encounters with individuals they could only describe as the pale teachers. These figures, always traveling in pairs, would arrive in communities during the hardest months of winter, offering to educate children in reading and arithmetic. Parents, desperate to provide their offspring with opportunities for advancement, would entrust their young ones to these mysterious educators. What emerged from the testimonies painted a picture of systematic psychological manipulation that left lasting scars on entire communities. Children who returned from these educational sessions displayed marked personality changes, speaking in measured tones about subjects far beyond their years and showing an unsettling detachment from their families. They would repeat fragments of stories that bore no resemblance to traditional folk tales, narratives filled with imagery of forests that consumed light and houses that stood at the boundaries between worlds. Maria Elisabeth Hoffmann, a midwife from the village of Schlüchtern, provided one of the most detailed accounts discovered in the archive. Born in 1768, she had delivered more than 400 children throughout her career and possessed an intimate knowledge of family histories spanning 3 generations. In her testimony, recorded by Wilhelm Grimm in 1811, she described how children from 7 different households began displaying identical symptoms following their education sessions. According to Hoffmann's account, these children would wake before dawn and gather in the village square, standing silently until the sun rose. They showed no interest in games or childhood pleasures, instead spending hours transcribing symbols that none of the adults could interpret. When questioned about their activities, they would respond with the same phrase, spoken in perfect unison: "The stories must be preserved, for they are the only truth that remains." The behavioral changes extended beyond mere oddity into territory that deeply unsettled their families. Children who had previously been affectionate and playful became distant and analytical, observing their parents with expressions that suggested they were cataloguing behaviors rather than experiencing familial bonds. They would ask questions about death and suffering with the clinical detachment of scholars rather than the innocent curiosity typical of their age. Most disturbing of all, they began predicting events with uncanny accuracy, foretelling deaths, illnesses, and misfortunes weeks before they occurred. Dr. Heinrich Ludwig Zimmermann, the regional physician who examined several of these children at the request of concerned parents, documented his findings in a report that would later disappear from medical records. Based on fragments preserved in the Grimm archive, Zimmermann noted that the affected children displayed no physical symptoms of illness or malnutrition, yet exhibited cognitive patterns that defied his understanding of child psychology. Their responses to questions followed logical progressions that seemed rehearsed, yet they claimed no memory of being taught these patterns of thought. The physician's notes described one particularly unsettling encounter with a young girl named Anna Katharina Müller, daughter of a local blacksmith. When asked about her family, the 8-year-old provided a detailed genealogy spanning 6 generations, including information about relatives who had died before her birth. She spoke of her ancestors' deaths with the same emotional tone she used to describe the weather, showing neither sadness nor fear when discussing mortality. Most puzzling of all, she claimed that these histories had been revealed to her through stories that were more true than memory itself. As winter deepened in 1811, the situation in Steinau and surrounding villages took a darker turn. Parents reported that their children had begun disappearing for hours at a time, returning with no memory of where they had been or what they had done. These absences always occurred during daylight hours, yet the children would return with their clothes bearing traces of damp earth and their shoes caked with mud that suggested they had been walking through dense forest underground. Wilhelm Müller, a woodsman who maintained the forest paths between Steinau and Brachtal, provided testimony that added another layer of mystery to the unfolding situation. Born in 1775, he had spent his entire adult life navigating the intricate network of trails that connected the scattered communities. His knowledge of the forest was encyclopedic, encompassing not only the official paths but also the countless deer tracks, logging routes, and forgotten byways that crisscrossed the wilderness. According to Müller's account, he began encountering children in areas of the forest where no established paths existed. These locations, often several kilometers from the nearest village, required navigation skills that young children simply did not possess. The youngsters would be standing motionless among the trees, facing the same direction as though waiting for something that never arrived. When approached, they would acknowledge his presence politely, but claim they were attending to their lessons, despite the absence of any visible instructor or educational materials. The woodsman's testimony took on an even more disturbing quality when he described the children's knowledge of the forest itself. They could identify plant species and animal tracks with expertise that rivaled his own decades of experience, speaking of the woodland ecosystem with scientific precision that seemed impossible for their age and background. They would point out subtle changes in tree growth patterns and soil composition that he had never noticed, explaining these phenomena in language that combined rustic dialect with terminology he had never heard before. More troubling still was their apparent ability to navigate the forest without reference to landmarks or established paths. Müller observed children moving through dense undergrowth with purposeful direction, following routes that led to locations he himself had never discovered, despite his lifetime of forest exploration. When he attempted to follow these paths on subsequent visits, he found himself unable to locate the routes the children had taken, as though the forest itself had shifted to conceal their passages. The winter of 1811 to 1812 marked the culmination of events that would haunt the region for generations to come. On the night of January 15th, 1812, a blizzard of unprecedented severity struck the area, depositing nearly 2 meters of snow and creating conditions that made travel between villages impossible. When the storm finally abated 3 days later, residents of Steinau discovered that 11 children between the ages of 6 and 12 had vanished without trace. The missing children included Anna Katharina Müller, the blacksmith's daughter whose genealogical knowledge had so disturbed Dr. Zimmermann. Also, among the disappeared were Johann Friedrich Weber, son of the village baker, Elisabeth Margaret Schmidt, daughter of a wool merchant, and 8 others whose families had noticed the characteristic behavioral changes following their encounters with the pale teachers. The absence of any footprints in the fresh snow suggested that the children had disappeared before the storm began, yet none of the parents could recall the exact moment when they last saw their offspring. Search parties organized by the village authorities combed the surrounding forest for weeks, following every established path and exploring areas that had rarely seen human presence. The searchers, led by Wilhelm Müller and several other experienced woodsmen, found no evidence of the missing children, despite covering hundreds of square kilometers. The complete absence of tracks, clothing fragments, or any other traces suggested either that the children had never entered the forest or that they had been removed by means that defied conventional explanation. What the search parties did discover, however, were structures that none of the local residents could explain. Deep within the forest, in clearings that seemed to have been recently created, stood crude shelters constructed from fallen branches and forest debris. These structures, clearly built by human hands, displayed architectural techniques that bore no resemblance to local building traditions. The shelters were arranged in geometric patterns that suggested deliberate planning rather than random construction, and each contained carved symbols that resembled the markings the children had been transcribing before their disappearance. Johann Baptist Weiss, a carpenter with 30 years of experience in regional construction methods, examined the shelters at the request of village authorities. His assessment, preserved in municipal records, noted that the building techniques employed concepts of structural engineering that seemed advanced beyond what might be expected from amateur construction. The joints were precisely fitted despite the use of crude tools, and the overall design displayed an understanding of load distribution that suggested formal architectural training. More puzzling were the symbols carved into the wooden supports of each shelter. Weiss described them as resembling no alphabet or decorative tradition familiar to him, yet displaying a consistency that suggested they represented a coherent system of communication. The carvings appeared fresh, created within weeks of the shelter's construction, yet the tools marks indicated the use of implements more precise than typical woodworking equipment available in rural villages. The symbols themselves defied easy categorization, combining geometric shapes with flowing curves that seemed to represent natural forms. Some resembled simplified depictions of trees, animals, and celestial bodies, while others consisted of abstract patterns that conveyed meaning through their mathematical relationships rather than representational imagery. When traced by finger, the symbols seemed to follow natural movements that suggested they were designed to be reproduced through physical gesture as much as visual recognition. As spring arrived in 1812, the investigation into the missing children's fate took an unexpected direction when Dr. Zimmermann received a package containing documents purportedly written by the disappeared youngsters. The materials arrived without explanation, bearing no postal markings or courier identification, as though they had simply materialized in his surgery overnight. The handwriting matched samples he had collected during his earlier examinations, yet the content reflected knowledge and experiences that seemed impossible for children of their age and background. The documents consisted of detailed observations of plant and animal life in regions of the forest that had never been catalogued by professional naturalists. The descriptions included precise measurements, behavioral notations, and seasonal patterns that demonstrated months of systematic study. The writing style combined childish penmanship with scientific methodology, creating texts that appeared simultaneously naive and sophisticated in their approach to documentation. Most unsettling were passages that described encounters with entities referred to as the true teachers, figures who supposedly possessed knowledge that had been preserved since ancient times through oral tradition. According to these accounts, the children had been selected for their ability to serve as vessels for this accumulated wisdom, which could only be transmitted through direct neural contact during specific atmospheric conditions. The documents claimed that the children's behavioral changes had been necessary adaptations to accommodate information that human consciousness normally could not process. The writings included references to historical events that had occurred decades before the children's birth, described from perspectives that suggested first-hand observation rather than learned information. They spoke of village customs and family genealogies with accuracy that exceeded even the memories of elderly residents, providing details about daily life in previous generations that had never been formally recorded. This knowledge appeared to have been acquired through means other than conventional education or storytelling. Professor Georg Heinrich Pertz, who served as Friedrich Wilhelm Becker's doctoral supervisor, became involved in the investigation when regional authorities requested academic assistance in interpreting the mysterious documents. Born in 1795 in Hanover, Pertz had established himself as one of Germany's leading historians and possessed extensive knowledge of regional folklore and cultural traditions. His analytical approach to historical documentation made him ideally suited to evaluate the authenticity and significance of the materials. Pertz's preliminary examination of the documents revealed inconsistencies that troubled him deeply. The paper used for the writings bore watermarks from mills that had been destroyed during the Napoleonic Wars, yet the ink showed no signs of age that would correspond to such antiquity. The linguistic patterns combined archaic grammatical structures with vocabulary that had only entered common usage within the previous decade, creating a temporal confusion that suggested either elaborate forgery or circumstances that defied rational explanation. The professor's investigation led him to correspond with Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm, who had maintained detailed records of their folklore collection activities throughout the affected region. The brothers confirmed that they had encountered similar accounts during their research, but had dismissed them as products of local superstition rather than factual reports. However, they admitted that the consistency of details across multiple unrelated sources had occasionally prompted them to wonder whether some kernel of truth lay hidden within the seemingly fantastical narratives. Jacob Grimm's response to Pertz's inquiries, preserved in the university archives until 1863, revealed that the brothers had indeed collected testimonies from individuals who claimed to have witnessed events similar to those described in the children's documents. These accounts, gathered from villages throughout Hesse and Lower Saxony, described encounters with educators who possessed knowledge that seemed to transcend normal human understanding. The witnesses consistently reported that these figures could predict natural phenomena with supernatural accuracy and demonstrated familiarity with historical events that preceded their apparent age. The correspondence also revealed that Jacob Grimm had attempted to locate some of the individuals who had provided these testimonies, hoping to gather additional details that might clarify the mysterious accounts. However, his efforts had been consistently frustrated by reports that the witnesses had either died unexpectedly or had simply vanished from their communities without explanation. The pattern of disappearances seemed to follow no logical sequence, affecting individuals of various ages and social positions whose only common trait was their willingness to speak about their encounters with the mysterious educators. Wilhelm Grimm's contribution to the correspondence focused on linguistic analysis of the testimonies they had collected. He noted that witnesses consistently used specific phrases and terminology that appeared nowhere else in regional dialect studies, suggesting either the existence of a secret vocabulary known only to a select group or the influence of an external linguistic tradition that had somehow penetrated local communities. The precision with which these unusual terms were employed indicated that their use was deliberate rather than accidental. The summer of 1812 brought no resolution to the mystery of the missing children, but it did produce additional evidence that deepened the puzzle surrounding their disappearance. Farmers working fields adjacent to the forest began reporting the discovery of objects that appeared to have been deliberately placed rather than accidentally lost. These items, ranging from children's clothing to educational materials, were found arranged in patterns that suggested ritualistic significance rather than random distribution. Klaus Friedrich Hartmann, a farmer whose property bordered the forest near the location where the mysterious shelters had been discovered, provided the most detailed account of these findings. Born in 1768, he had worked the same land for over 4 decades and possessed intimate knowledge of every field, stream, and woodland boundary within his territory. His testimony described discovering items that had definitely not been present during his previous visits to the same locations, appearing overnight as though placed by unseen hands. The objects themselves told a story that both clarified and complicated the ongoing investigation. Children's shoes, perfectly preserved despite months of exposure to weather, were found positioned at regular intervals along paths that led deeper into the forest. Educational materials, including slate boards and writing implements, were discovered arranged in classroom configurations within natural clearings that showed no other evidence of human presence. Most puzzling of all were the books. Volumes containing text written in the same mysterious script that had appeared in the forest shelters. Dr. Zimmermann's examination of these recovered materials revealed details that challenged conventional understanding of the children's fate. The clothing showed no signs of struggle or violence, appearing instead to have been carefully removed and preserved through methods that prevented normal deterioration. The educational materials bore traces of recent use, with chalk dust and ink stains that suggested ongoing scholarly activity despite the absence of any visible instructors or students. The books discovered among these artifacts represented perhaps the most significant evidence in the entire investigation. Written entirely in the symbolic script found in the forest shelters, they contained detailed illustrations that depicted scenes of education taking place in natural settings. The drawings showed children engaged in learning activities under the guidance of tall, pale figures whose facial features were rendered with photographic precision despite the artistic medium's limitations. These illustrations provided the first clear visual representation of the mysterious educators, whose existence had been suggested by numerous testimonies but never definitively confirmed. The figures were depicted as adults of indeterminate age, possessing features that seemed somehow familiar yet impossible to place definitively. Their clothing resembled traditional academic robes, but incorporated design elements that bore no relationship to any known educational institution or religious order. The autumn of 1812 marked a turning point in the investigation when Friedrich Wilhelm Becker made a discovery that would fundamentally alter understanding of the entire situation. While conducting research in the sealed archives beneath the University of Göttingen, he located a collection of documents that predated the Grimm brothers' work by nearly a century. These materials, written in Latin and bearing the seals of various ecclesiastical authorities, described incidents remarkably similar to those occurring in contemporary Hessian villages. The historical documents detailed events that had taken place throughout Germanic territories during the late 17th and early 18th centuries, involving children who displayed sudden advancements in intellectual capacity following encounters with mysterious educators. Church records from dozens of communities described similar patterns: the arrival of pale teachers during winter months, dramatic changes in children's behavior and knowledge, and eventual disappearances that left no physical evidence. What made these historical accounts particularly significant was their consistency across time periods and geographical regions that had little contact with one another. Villages separated by hundreds of kilometers reported identical phenomena occurring at intervals of roughly 25 to 30 years, suggesting a cyclical pattern that had persisted for generations. The documentation indicated that church authorities had attempted to investigate these incidents on multiple occasions, but their efforts had invariably been frustrated by the same mysterious disappearances that had affected other witnesses. Cardinal Friedrich von Seckendorff-Abadar, who had overseen investigations in Bavaria during the early 18th century, left records that provided insight into the organized nature of these occurrences. Born in 1669, he had served the Catholic Church in various capacities for over 50 years and possessed extensive experience in evaluating claims of supernatural phenomena. His assessment of the children's disappearances concluded that they represented a systematic program rather than isolated incidents. The Cardinal's investigation had led him to theorize that the mysterious educators belonged to an organization that had preserved ancient knowledge through centuries of political and religious upheaval. His record suggested that this group recruited children with specific intellectual capabilities, providing them with education that far exceeded anything available through conventional institutions. The ultimate fate of these children remained unclear, but the Cardinal believed they were incorporated into the organization itself, continuing the cycle of recruitment and education across generations. Church records indicated that Cardinal von Seckendorff-Abadar had attempted to establish contact with this mysterious organization, hoping to evaluate their methods and purposes from a theological perspective. His efforts had resulted in a series of meetings with representatives who demonstrated knowledge of Scripture and philosophy that impressed even the learned Cardinal. However, these encounters had ultimately convinced him that the organization's goals were incompatible with Christian doctrine, leading him to declare their activities heretical and worthy of suppression. The Cardinal's subsequent efforts to curtail the organization's activities had met with limited success. While his interventions had temporarily disrupted their operations in some regions, The cyclical pattern of appearances continued with slight modifications that suggested adaptive responses to opposition. The documentation indicated that the organization possessed resources and capabilities that allowed them to avoid sustained persecution while maintaining their educational programs. Professor Pertz's analysis of these historical documents led him to develop a comprehensive theory about the nature of the mysterious organization and their relationship with the missing children. His hypothesis, outlined in letters to his colleagues at other German universities, suggested that the group represented a surviving remnant of pre-Christian educational traditions that had adapted to changing political and religious circumstances by operating in secrecy. According to Pertz's theory, the organization's educational methods were based on principles that had been developed during ancient times when knowledge transmission occurred primarily through oral tradition and direct mentor-student relationships. The dramatic behavioral changes observed in recruited children resulted from exposure to learning techniques that engaged cognitive capabilities normally dormant in conventional educational settings. The mysterious symbols and advanced knowledge demonstrated by the children represented fragments of this ancient pedagogical system. The cyclical nature of the organization's appearances suggested careful planning, designed to minimize exposure while maximizing recruitment success. The 25 to 30-year intervals between incidents in any given region corresponded roughly to generational cycles, allowing sufficient time for communities to forget previous occurrences, while ensuring that suitable candidates would be available for selection. The winter timing of recruitment activities took advantage of seasonal isolation that limited outside observation and interference. Pertz's correspondence with university colleagues revealed growing concern about the implications of his research. Several professors who had been consulted about specific aspects of the investigation reported receiving visits from individuals who matched descriptions of the pale teachers. These encounters, while superficially academic in nature, had left the scholars with profound unease about continuing their involvement in research related to the missing children. Dr. Hermann Ludwig Ferdinand von Helmholtz, who had been consulted about the physiological aspects of the children's behavioral changes, described an encounter that exemplified these mysterious visits. The renowned scientist reported that 2 individuals had appeared at his laboratory without appointment, claiming to represent a research institution that possessed advanced knowledge of human neurological development. Their questions about his assessment of the children's cognitive changes demonstrated familiarity with details that had not been made public. The visitors had proposed collaboration on research that would advance understanding of human intellectual potential, offering access to educational methods that could revolutionize academic instruction. However, their reluctance to provide specific information about their institution or methodology had troubled Helmholtz, leading him to decline their proposal and request that they not return. The encounter had left him with the distinct impression that his refusal had been anticipated and perhaps even desired by the mysterious researchers. Similar reports from other academics suggested a pattern of contact that seemed designed to monitor the investigation's progress rather than genuinely seek collaboration. The visitors consistently demonstrated knowledge that exceeded what should have been available to them while carefully avoiding commitments that would reveal information about their organization or activities. Their behavior suggested confidence that their operations would continue, regardless of academic scrutiny or official investigation. The winter of 1812 to 1813 brought an unexpected development when several of the missing children reappeared in their home villages, arriving during a snowstorm that provided cover for their return. The children, now showing a year's worth of physical growth and development, exhibited further behavioral changes that both reassured and troubled their families. They retained their advanced intellectual capabilities while displaying emotional warmth that had been absent during their previous transformation period. Anna Katharina Müller, the blacksmith's daughter who had been among the first to disappear, returned to her family on the night of December 21st. Her parents reported that she appeared healthy and well cared for, showing no signs of hardship or mistreatment despite her year-long absence. Her knowledge and capabilities had expanded dramatically, encompassing subjects ranging from mathematics and natural philosophy to languages she had never been taught. The returned children provided partial answers to questions about their disappearance while raising new mysteries about their experiences and the organization responsible for their education. They spoke of attending a school located in a place they described as between the forests and the stars, and where they had received instruction from teachers who possessed knowledge accumulated over centuries. Their descriptions of the curriculum emphasized direct observation and experiential learning rather than rote memorization or theoretical study. According to the children's accounts, their education had included subjects unknown to conventional academic institutions, focusing on understanding natural systems and human consciousness rather than traditional scholarly disciplines. They claimed to have learned methods for observing phenomena that were normally invisible to human perception, techniques for preserving and transmitting knowledge across generations, and principles for living in harmony with natural cycles and environmental systems. The children's explanations of their educational experiences included references to other students who had been recruited from communities throughout Germanic territories and beyond. They described a diverse population of young scholars who had been selected based on specific intellectual and psychological criteria rather than social status or family connections. The educational program appeared to emphasize individual development while fostering collective understanding of complex subjects. Most significantly, the children revealed that their return to their home villages was not permanent, but rather represented a transitional phase in their educational process. They explained that they would remain with their families for several years, applying their newly acquired knowledge to benefit their communities, while continuing their studies through methods that did not require physical presence at the mysterious school. Their ultimate destiny involved returning to serve as teachers for future generations of recruited students. Dr. Zimmermann's examination of the returned children documented the remarkable extent of their intellectual and physical development during their year of absence. Their growth exceeded normal developmental expectations, suggesting either that their chronological age had been miscalculated or that their educational experiences had included factors that accelerated natural maturation processes. Their cognitive abilities demonstrated mastery of subjects that required years of conventional study to achieve. The physician's assessment noted particularly significant developments in the children's observational and analytical skills. They could diagnose medical conditions with accuracy that rivaled his own professional experience, identifying symptoms and understanding physiological processes through methods that seemed to combine intuitive insight with systematic knowledge. Their recommendations for treatment included techniques that proved effective despite having no basis in established medical practice. The children's return to village life created both benefits and tensions within their communities. Their advanced capabilities proved valuable for solving practical problems related to agriculture, construction, and community organization, leading to improvements in local living conditions. However, their knowledge and perspectives often challenged traditional beliefs and practices, creating conflicts with established authorities and social hierarchies. Religious leaders particularly struggled to accommodate the children's presence within existing theological frameworks. The young scholars demonstrated comprehensive knowledge of Christian doctrine while maintaining perspectives that seemed to derive from alternative spiritual traditions. Their questions about religious teachings revealed logical inconsistencies and historical inaccuracies that troubled clergy members who lacked comparable theological education. The children's integration into village educational systems proved equally challenging, as their capabilities far exceeded what local schools could accommodate or conventional teachers could address. They served as informal tutors for other children, while pursuing independent studies that required resources unavailable in rural communities. Their presence highlighted the limitations of traditional educational approaches, while demonstrating possibilities that seemed both inspiring and threatening. The spring of 1813 brought governmental attention to the situation when reports of the children's return reached administrative offices in Kassel and Frankfurt. Officials responsible for educational policy and social order recognized that the phenomenon represented either an opportunity for advancing human knowledge or a threat to established institutional authority. Their investigation aimed to determine whether the mysterious educational program could be studied and potentially replicated through official channels. Freiherr Friedrich Karl vom Stein, who had served as Prussia's chief minister and possessed extensive experience in educational reform, was appointed to lead the governmental investigation. Born in 1757, he had dedicated much of his career to modernizing Germanic educational systems and held strong opinions about the relationship between learning and social progress. His assessment of the situation would determine official policy regarding the mysterious organization and their educational activities. Stein's investigation began with interviews of the returned children and their families, focusing on practical aspects of the educational experience rather than theoretical implications. He sought to understand the organizational structure that had made such remarkable instruction possible, the resources required to sustain such programs, and the potential for adapting successful methods to conventional educational institutions. The children's responses to Stein's questions revealed organizational sophistication that exceeded anything found in established educational institutions. They described a system that provided individualized instruction based on each student's specific capabilities and interests, while maintaining curriculum standards that ensured comprehensive knowledge development. The teaching methods emphasized practical application of theoretical knowledge and direct engagement with natural and social systems. The educational program's resource requirements appeared minimal compared to the results achieved, relying on environmental settings and experiential learning rather than expensive facilities and equipment. The teachers demonstrated knowledge that had been accumulated through generations of scholarship while possessing practical skills that enabled them to thrive in various geographical and social conditions. The sustainability of the program seemed to depend on careful selection and development of human resources rather than material infrastructure. Most importantly for Stein's assessment, the children indicated that the mysterious organization maintained ethical standards that prioritized student welfare and community benefit over institutional power or material gain. The educational experience had been designed to develop individuals who would contribute positively to society rather than serve narrow organizational interests. The recruitment and training processes emphasized personal growth and social responsibility rather than loyalty to specific ideological positions. Stein's preliminary conclusions suggested that the mysterious educational program represented innovations that could significantly advance Germanic intellectual and social development if properly understood and adapted. However, his efforts to establish formal contact with the organization met with polite but firm refusal to engage in governmental negotiations. The mysterious educators indicated willingness to continue their activities, but declined to submit to official oversight or regulation. The summer of 1813 marked the beginning of a period of careful observation as governmental authorities attempted to monitor the organization's activities without directly interfering with their educational programs. This approach reflected recognition that heavy-handed intervention might eliminate valuable opportunities for learning about advanced pedagogical methods while acknowledging legitimate concerns about unsupervised educational activities affecting children from German communities. The returned children served as informal liaisons between the mysterious organization and conventional authorities, providing information about educational methods and organizational principles while respecting boundaries established by their teachers. Their communications revealed that the organization had extensive knowledge of governmental activities and political developments, suggesting intelligence-gathering capabilities that complemented their educational functions. The children also indicated that their organization maintained similar educational programs in other European countries and possibly beyond, operating with the knowledge and occasional cooperation of various governmental and religious authorities. The scope of their activities suggested resources and coordination capabilities that exceeded those of most established institutions while maintaining the flexibility and adaptability that characterized their educational approaches. Friedrich Wilhelm Becker's continued research in the university archives uncovered additional historical documents that provided context for understanding the organization's long-term objectives and operational methods. Records from medieval monasteries described scholars who possessed knowledge that seemed to transcend normal human limitations, suggesting that the mysterious educational tradition had roots extending back centuries or possibly millennia. The monastic records indicated that representatives of this educational tradition had maintained contacts with various religious and secular authorities throughout European history, providing counsel and knowledge that contributed to significant developments in philosophy, science, and social organization. Their influence appeared to have been carefully modulated to support human progress without creating dependence or disrupting natural development processes. These historical accounts suggested that the organization's recruitment and education of children represented only one aspect of their broader mission to preserve and transmit knowledge across generations and cultural boundaries. Their educational programs appeared designed to create individuals capable of adapting ancient wisdom to changing social and technological circumstances while maintaining ethical principles that prioritized human welfare and environmental sustainability. The documents also revealed that the organization had faced periodic persecution from authorities who viewed their activities as threats to established power structures or religious orthodoxy. However, their ability to maintain operations across centuries of political and social upheaval demonstrated remarkable resilience and adaptability. Their survival strategies emphasized discretion and patience rather than confrontation or resistance. The autumn of 1813 brought unexpected visitors to the villages where the children had returned, as representatives of the mysterious organization arrived to conduct what they described as continuing education evaluations. These encounters provided the first direct contact between the educators and community members since the original recruitment period, offering opportunities for observation and interaction that had been impossible during previous phases of the investigation. The visiting educators, 3 individuals who matched descriptions provided by historical witnesses, appeared to be conducting assessments of both the returned children and the communities that had accepted them. Their evaluations seemed designed to determine the effectiveness of the educational program and the readiness of communities to benefit from continued interaction with the organization. Local residents who observed these encounters reported that the educators demonstrated remarkable knowledge of community history, family relationships, and individual personalities, despite having no apparent previous contact with the villages. Their questions about local conditions and social dynamics revealed understanding of complex factors that affected community welfare and development potential. The educators' interactions with the returned children provided insights into the ongoing nature of their educational relationship. Rather than simple teacher-student communication, these encounters resembled collegial consultations between scholars who shared common knowledge and objectives while possessing different areas of specialization. The children demonstrated confidence and capability that reflected their continued intellectual growth since returning to their families. Dr. Zimmerman, who was permitted to observe several of these educational consultations, noted that the methods employed differed significantly from conventional teaching approaches. The educators used techniques that seemed to activate dormant cognitive capabilities while providing information that enhanced rather than replaced existing knowledge. Their instruction methods appeared to be individually customized based on each student's specific developmental needs and community circumstances. The consultations also revealed the organization's broader perspective on education and human development, emphasizing long-term thinking that extended beyond individual lifespans to encompass generational and cultural evolution. The educators spoke of their work in terms that suggested they viewed themselves as custodians of knowledge that belonged to humanity as a whole, rather than to any specific group or institution. The winter of 1813 to 1814 represented a period of consolidation, as communities that had experienced the mysterious organization's presence adapted to the ongoing presence of the returned children and the knowledge they had acquired. The integration process created opportunities for local residents to benefit from advanced educational methods, while presenting challenges related to traditional social structures and authority relationships. The returned children had established informal educational programs that provided other community members with access to knowledge and techniques that improved daily life in various practical ways. Their instruction in agricultural methods, medical treatment, and problem-solving approaches contributed to increased prosperity and reduced hardship in their home villages. However, their presence also created tensions with established religious and governmental authorities who viewed the children's knowledge and methods as potential challenges to traditional belief systems and power structures. Some community leaders expressed concern that the children's influence might undermine social stability or encourage questioning of established practices and institutions. These tensions were partially addressed through careful communication between the children and local authorities, emphasizing the complementary rather than competitive nature of their educational contributions. The children demonstrated respect for traditional knowledge and practices while offering additional perspectives and methods that could enhance rather than replace existing approaches. The governmental investigation led by Freiherr vom Stein continued throughout this period, focusing on documenting the long-term effects of the educational program and assessing the potential for broader implementation of successful methods. Officials observed the returned children's integration into their communities, while maintaining contact with the mysterious organization through indirect channels. Stein's ongoing assessment suggested that the educational program had achieved remarkable success in developing human potential, while maintaining ethical standards that prioritized individual and community welfare. The methods employed appeared to offer significant advantages over conventional educational approaches, while avoiding the negative consequences often associated with intensive intellectual development. The spring of 1814 brought a significant development when the mysterious organization formally invited governmental representatives to observe their educational facilities and methods under controlled conditions. This unprecedented offer represented the first opportunity for official authorities to gain direct knowledge of the organization's operations and capabilities. Freiherr vom Stein personally accepted this invitation, accompanied by a small team of educational specialists and medical experts. Their visit, which lasted for 3 weeks during May and June of 1814, provided comprehensive insights into the organization's methods, resources, and objectives that had previously been available only through indirect observation and testimony. The educational facility visited by the governmental delegation was located in a forested region that seemed to exist outside normal geographical boundaries, accessible through routes that changed based on factors that the visitors could not identify or understand. The facility itself incorporated natural environmental features with constructed elements in ways that created educational environments unlike anything found in conventional institutions. The organization's educational methods emphasized direct experience and practical application rather than theoretical study, providing students with opportunities to engage with natural systems, social dynamics, and intellectual challenges through carefully designed scenarios that promoted understanding and skill development. The curriculum integrated subjects that were normally taught separately while maintaining rigor and depth that exceeded conventional academic standards. The teaching staff included individuals who possessed knowledge and capabilities that seemed to transcend normal human limitations, while maintaining personalities and social skills that facilitated effective communication and relationship building.